Episode 3, Blackout City. The first full blackout didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a decision. One moment the hostile hallway was flooded with emergency light, the next it was swallowed whole. The screens died. The backup lamps flickered once and gave up. Somewhere below, a generator coughed, rattled, and went silent. For one stretched second, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Then the screaming started. Not because people were injured yet. Because they suddenly understood they were blind. Janet stood frozen in the dark, one hand still on Tyson's sleeve. Tyson had already moved, instinct taking over where his body was failing him. He pulled her back from the window just as a distant flash lit the room orange-white and turned the glass into a mirror of panic. Outside, the city had stopped pretending to be normal. Helicopters thudded overhead. Boots ran in the stairwell. Someone in the lobby was shouting for their child. A siren began somewhere far away and was answered by another and another until the whole city sounded like it was being swallowed alive by its own alarm system. Janet's first thought was absurdly ordinary. Her laptop was still charging. Her second thought was worse. Her phone had no signal. Tyson crouched by the bed, listening. He looked like a man who had spent too much of his life learning how to hear danger before it arrived. In the dark, his voice came low and clipped. "They're sealing roads." "What does that mean?" "It means they don't want movement." Janet felt cold spread through her chest. "Who?" Tyson didn't answer right away. The silence was answer enough. Outside, something heavy rolled past the building. Not a civilian vehicle. Too armored. Too deliberate. The windows trembled. Janet pressed her back to the wall and tried to breathe through her nose. She could hear other guests in neighboring rooms whispering, crying, opening and shutting drawers, pulling on shoes, praying into the dark. Then the TV in the lobby came back for just a few seconds. Not with a news anchor. With a live feed. The image was blurry and shaking, but unmistakable. A coastal road, smoke in the distance, armed vehicles, and civilians being pushed back by military personnel. Across the bottom of the screen, the text stuttered in broken transmission. Airspace restricted. Sea access denied. Foreign nationals advised to shelter in place. Janet stared at the words as if they were an insult. Shelter in place. That phrase had always sounded temporary before. Administrative. Clean. The kind of thing written by people who expected the world to keep obeying. Now it sounded like a coffin instruction. Tyson moved to the window and looked down through the curtain gap. "What do you see?" Janet asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, too many uniforms. Her stomach dropped. Rumors in the dark. By dawn, the hostel had become a rumor machine. Some said the Americans had been cut off completely. Some said naval ships were dead in the water. Some said China's cyber strikes had jammed Allied communications so hard that nobody could tell who was moving where. Some said the Israelis were preparing for a broader response. Some said the US was already striking back. Some said the sky over the sea had looked red all night. Nobody knew what was true. That was the worst part. Truth had become too slow for the room. Janet sat on the edge of the bed, knees together, watching strangers come and go with backpacks and wild eyes. Her hair had gone flat. Her makeup was long gone. Her tailored travel clothes were wrinkled and dirty. She looked, for the first time in her life, exactly like what she was now. A civilian trapped inside history. Tyson had changed the bandage on his side twice that morning. He was running on stubbornness and pain. His borrowed clothes fit badly, but they hid the uniform, and that alone made him look more human to the people around them. Still, anyone who looked closely would see the way he stood, not relaxed, not casual, but ready. Even injured, he carried the posture of someone trained for a war that had outgrown the battlefield. Janet caught him staring at the TV and saw the anger behind his face. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Tyson gave a short, humorless laugh. "That people always think the hard part is the shooting." She waited. "The hard part is when the system tells you the war is somewhere else," he said. Then all at once the system stops working, and you realize the war was already everywhere. Janet let that sit for a moment, because it sounded exactly right. The escape plan. By late morning, the hostel manager announced that buses might come, but no one knew when, and no one knew where they would be allowed to go. The airport was still not open. The train line was effectively dead. Road checkpoints had multiplied. Foreign nationals were being instructed to remain indoors unless told otherwise, which meant they were prisoners with better luggage. Janet refused to accept that. She pulled Tyson back into the room and spread her own travel documents, a printed itinerary, a folded map, and several screenshots from her phone across the bed like pieces of a failed argument. "We can't stay here," she said. Tyson leaned against the dresser. "I know. Then we leave before they lock this area down completely." He studied her for a second. Not just her words, but her face. He could tell she was pushing through fear by turning it into logistics. He recognized the move. Soldiers did the same thing. "What's the plan?" he asked. Janet inhaled. "There's a convoy route being talked about in the lobby. If we can get on one of the buses heading east, maybe we can reach a safer transfer point. Maybe from there we can get to a functioning airport in another country." "That's a lot of maybes." "It's all we have." Tyson nodded slowly, then looked toward the window. "And if the convoy gets hit?" Janet's mouth tightened. "Then we don't stay in line." For the first time since the beach, Tyson actually smiled. It was small, tired, almost impossible, but it was real. "You're getting better at this," he said. "At what?" "Surviving wrong." The street below. They left the room just long enough to see the street. Janet hated the sight so much she almost turned back. The city was now a patchwork of movement and paralysis. Military trucks blocking intersections. Civilians dragging luggage through dust and smoke. Shop fronts shuttered. Lights out in half the buildings. A burned-out vehicle on its side at the end of the block. Helicopters circling low enough to make the windows shudder. Every face looked the same, tired, alert, and on the edge of panic. A woman in a business suit was screaming at a police officer that her husband was still inside a hospital and she needed to get across the checkpoint. A man in sandals was carrying an old dog wrapped in a towel. Two teenagers stood on a curb filming the chaos until someone shouted at them to put the phones away because the cameras might make them targets. Janet saw all of it and understood something brutal. This was no longer a crisis moving toward civilians. This was civilians trapped inside the machinery of war. Then her eyes caught something near the far end of the block, soldiers guiding a line of American-looking evacuees toward transport, but the convoy was moving fast, and the expressions on the soldiers' faces said the window was already closing. Tyson noticed it too. "We move now," he said. Janet nodded. Then a sharp crack split the air. Everyone flinched. A second later, a plume of smoke rose from somewhere beyond the next street over. Not a direct hit close enough to destroy the hostel. Just close enough to remind everyone that the city was being measured in impacts now. Tyson grabbed Janet by the wrist. "Now," he said again. And they ran. The hidden danger. Halfway down the staircase, they heard the sound that changed everything. Boots. Not running. Approaching. Tyson stopped instantly and pulled Janet behind a landing wall. He put one finger to his lips. The staircase went quiet except for the buildings settling around them and the distant rumble of something larger moving through the city. Two voices came up from below. Military. Searching rooms. Janet's pulse slammed so hard she thought she might be sick. Tyson leaned close enough for her to hear him without speaking loudly. "If they find me, it gets worse." Janet nodded. She understood. The hidden uniform had not solved the problem. It had only delayed it. The voices came closer. Then, in a split-second decision, Janet shoved open a maintenance door at the end of the landing and dragged Tyson through it into a narrow service corridor lined with cleaning supplies and broken carts. She closed the door just as one of the boots landed on the stair above them. They stood in the dark, breath held, listening to the soldiers search the floor on the other side of the wall. Tyson's hand was on the small of her back, steadying her. Janet realized, with a strange violent clarity, that this was what trust looked like now. Not comfort. Not romance. Not safety. Just the decision not to let go when the room turns black. The search moved away. Janet and Tyson slipped into the corridor and out through a side exit into the heat of the street. The city hit them like a wall: smoke, noise, distant blasts, shouting, engines, dust. Janet grabbed Tyson's arm. "Do you think the buses are real?"